Welcome to Beatsource Tech. My name's Mojaxx, and today we're diving deep into one of my favourite niches in DJ technology, the world of the boutique Rotary mixer. Now, in recent years, we've seen a few entrants at the lower end of the price scale when it comes to Rotary, some more affordable units out there, but the one we're looking at today has gone completely in the opposite direction. If you're into DJ technology at all, the name Andy Rigby-Jones might well be familiar to you. In his role as a design manager at Allen & Heath from the late 90s onwards, he was the driving force behind the Zone series of mixers from day one, and so was instrumental in bringing features like filters and 4-band EQ, amongst many others, to the mainstream DJ booth. In 2014, he started his own company, Union Audio, which until now has designed and/or manufactured products for other brands, the Play Differently Model 1 and 1.4, and the Master Sound range of mixers. My liking of all of those is well documented on this channel already. What we're looking at today though is the first ever product released and marketed under the Union Audio name, and that makes it quite special. This is Andy's mixer, nobody else's, conceived without any direction from anyone outside his own team and built exactly the way he wants it to be rather than to a specific price target. The ORBIT.6 is a 6-channel rotary valve mixer built into a 4U rack chassis. At first glance, this means there is some apparent similarity to an earlier product from Andy's past, the Allen & Heath Zone V6, that shared a similar form factor and number of channels, as well as a few other features, but Andy has been very clear that the sound of the two mixers is very different, and of course we'll get on to the sound later. First though, let's go through the features on the Orbit. The first 4 channels are switchable between line and phono, and the 5th and 6th have 2 line inputs. On channel 6, one of the line inputs can be switched to a mic input if needed. All channels have thermionic valve stages using dual triode valves. Each of the channels has its own bright and clear level meter, a Q switch, and then my favourite feature which Andy has popularised, a high pass filter instead of channel EQ. I could be wrong, but I think the V6 was the first mixer on the market to have this, and having spent a lot of time working just with filters on the Model 1.4 and on the various Master Sounds mixers, I am all about it. It's a very smooth way of working. Each channel has a trim control and a knob for effect send and return, which can be changed to pre or post fader on a per channel basis. Coming back to those trim controls, they are very important on the Orbit, as the gain structure on the mixer is designed differently from some other rotaries. For the best signal to noise ratio and sound overall, on the Orbit you are meant to preset your trim control so the channel level meter is peaking just above 0, and then bring the main rotary knob right round to maximum as you fade it in. This may take a little adjusting to for those coming from say a URI, but it might make the transition easier for DJs who generally use linear faders. To the right of the main channels is a 3-way master isolator. Each band boosts by 6 dB and fully cuts, which along with the vertical alignment points to its intended use as a tool for shaping the sound rather than a full-on performance tool for DJs like Joe Claussell. It's nowhere near as aggressive as many other isolators I've used, the Dope Reel being the champion there, but it isn't meant to be. There is of course a master insert should you wish to add your own choice of isolator to the Orbit separately. The queuing system is great, with a loud, clear output, and the individual cue buttons have a very premium feeling click to them. Multiple channels can be selected for queuing at once, and there is a Cue Master blend knob, but no split queue. Then finally on the right hand side we have the master level control and one for the booth, which has its own 2-band EQ. This is a feature which seems to be getting more popular on club mixers, and I'm happy to see it. The other thing you'll notice is the rather tasty output VU meters. In some shots here you might wonder if they're lit up at all, but in fact the lighting is ultraviolet and I love it. In the dark they are plenty visible but not glowing brightly in your face. If you do peak the output however, they change to a very bright and angry red, impossible to miss. On the subject of lighting, the main rotary pots are illuminated red around the edge. This doesn't have much of a practical benefit beyond making them easy to spot in a dark booth, but it does look great. And so we should get onto those pots, which are the first really special part of the Orbit that I'll mention. Every rotary user has their own taste when it comes to how they like the pots to feel, but there's always one issue which is usually unavoidable. That feel of the pots will change over time as the mechanisms loosen up. With the Orbit, Union Audio have gone for a heavy heavy overall feel, which is ideal for precise level control. But how to maintain that feel over time? Well, when you turn the knobs, you aren't actually feeling the pots themselves, but instead the unique damping system which Union Audio have developed. It's a similar idea to, say, the way that the glove box in a luxury car has that smooth opening motion year after year. So the knobs on a 5-year-old ORBIT.6 will feel exactly the same as one which is box fresh. This is quite something, and one of my favourite things about the mixer. It's a perfect example of going the extra mile to ensure that the user experience is really good. Moving around the back, there are of course all the corresponding connections for the things I've already mentioned, plus a few other things of note. Both master and booth outputs are on balanced XLRs, and there's a record output on RCAs. The aux in and out plus the master insert are on balanced jacks, and the XLR mic input on channel 6 has high and low EQ plus a trim control. Something I did not expect to see was the post-fader direct outputs for each of the 6 channels. These are also balanced and can be fed to a multi-track recorder or DAW, allowing each channel to be recorded separately. Great for the studio. What you won't find on the back is a regular IEC socket for power, and that's because the ORBIT.6 also ships with the purpose-built Europa power supply. This could almost justify a whole video in itself, there's so much going on with it. Basically, it's a hybrid linear power supply configured specifically for the region the mixer will be used in. It has 3 outputs, plus 16 volt and minus 16 volt to power the mixer's analog circuitry, and plus 12 volts to power the valve heater elements. What does this mean in practical terms? Well, it means that you have this rather large external box which will need to be placed somewhere, which connects to the mixer via specific supplied locking cable. It will also need good ventilation as it runs pretty hot, as does the mixer itself, but its contribution to the overall sound of the Orbit should not be underestimated, and so I get why they've done it. I suppose at this point we should talk about pricing. The ORBIT.6 is, as far as I know, the most expensive DJ mixer currently on the market at around £5,490 in the UK. Now that is obviously a lot, but it's worth keeping in mind that, taking inflation into account, that's actually a fair bit cheaper than the V6 was at launch 20 odd years ago. So how are Union Audio justifying that price? Well, there are a lot of factors in play. Firstly, as you'd expect, the mixer is fully handcrafted by their team in the UK, and that's a pretty expensive endeavour in itself these days. Secondly, the mixer is fully discrete, including the isolator. A quick breakdown on what that means, largely cribbed from the Orbit's manual. A discrete circuit is one built from individual components rather than an integrated circuit where all of the components are etched onto a single wafer of silicon. The basic building block of analog electronics is the operational amplifier, or op-amp, and commercial op-amps are complex, containing many transistors, resistors and capacitors, many of which are not audio related. A purpose-made discrete op-amp, though, only needs sufficient complexity to perform its intended function, and so can be designed with far fewer components, each of which could also affect the sound. And in a discrete op-amp, each component can be individually chosen for the best audio performance. Now, discrete circuits aren't new in the Rotary world. Others who offer them currently include Resor and Condenser, but those are also at the higher priced end of things. It's simply a lot more work to build discrete circuits from scratch compared to using ICs. The other thing which also adds to the cost of the ORBIT.6 is the attention to detail in the build. The whole thing is impeccable, which I haven't mentioned but which I would hope is obvious, with the 6mm aluminium faceplate being beautifully CNC machined front and rear, glass bead blasted and hard anodized. This goes way beyond a simple aluminium panel with some holes drilled into it, and this all costs a lot to produce. Add on things like that custom built damping system for the Rotaries and the Europa power supply too. The Master Sounds linear power supply is almost $500 and that does a lot less, and you can, I hope, start to see how the price, whilst very high, is not outlandish. The finest construction in the world means nothing if the sound isn't rather special too though, and for this one I thought it was finally time to find a way to do some real comparative testing against some of the Orbit's contemporaries. So I took it round to my friend Stephen Dunn's Record Cave. He's a legendary local DJ known for playing for the likes of Hard Times, and also happens to have the biggest collection of high-end Rotary mixers of anyone I know. He has the Master Sounds Clarity A sound system, which was the one I looked at on the channel last year. I took it round so he could try it, and he'd bought it from Master Sounds within a few hours, which is why the full review never happened. It's a fantastic system, and he also has a vintage Kef setup to boot. In use, the Orbit really does sound as special as you'd hope. Clarity and accuracy in the mids and treble is incredibly clean with no harshness or distortion, but where the mixer really shines and differs from the V6 is in the low end. The bass absolutely kicks, with a roundness to the sub notes which is unlike anything else I've heard. It's most obvious when you roll off the bass with the channel filter and then slam it back in. Stephen and I found ourselves making the bass face quite a lot during the session. It felt to me like the Orbit is really meant to be a club mixer, as opposed to the kind of mixer where you'll sit around stroking your beard listening to original jazz pressings with it. I spoke to Andy about this and he confirmed my suspicions. Where the V6 back in the day was designed to be as flat as possible, that was not the goal with the Orbit. It's designed to work incredibly well with dance music, getting the very best out of house, techno and disco tracks, and it definitely does. Some other notes on the sound: as with a lot of recent Union Audio products, the balance between turntables and CDJs is spot on. This is no doubt helped even more by the valves in the case of the Orbit, with them lending a degree of analog warmth to digital sources which you just don't get otherwise. And that's important, I think. Most Rotary heads love their vinyl, but many aren't going to be playing that exclusively, and so great performance with digital is also crucial. The thing which great analog mixers usually do better than digital ones is summing, and until you've heard it, it's really hard to understand the difference. And there the Orbit is absolutely on point. Get your mix beat matched just right and you can barely hear the transition happening with no EQ required. Aided by those precise damped main pots, blending on the mixer is an absolute joy. Overall, I was genuinely blown away by the sound of the Orbit. Sound will always be subjective and is dependent on so many factors: the rest of the system, the room, the music you play. What I'd really love is to hear it on a massive high quality club system like one of those found at Fabric London, coincidentally the only place I ever heard the V6, where I think it will be absolutely astonishing. At this point I'll cut to me just working the different controls on the mixer so you can get an idea of how it all functions. This will be quite long, but it's important to do, so skip to the final chapter here on YouTube if you just want to get right to my conclusions. So there you go. Hopefully that's given you an idea of how some of the controls on the Orbit impact on the sound it puts out. Obviously, what I can't do here is demonstrate the sound of the mixer to you. I can't do it. You know, it's a subjective thing, first of all, completely subjective. And it's a YouTube video. You know, there's always compression and everything else. You'll never really get a true reflection of how a product sounds through a video. All I can do is relay my thoughts on it. And I do think it sounds incredible, like really, really good. When we did that testing session, I was absolutely blown away by the sound of it. Interestingly, though, you know, Stephen, he has his main mixer in there normally is the modern Mojaxx. And he loves that modern Mojaxx. And I really like the sound of that too. I thought that sounded really good. For me, it was a definite. Like, if I had the choice out of these two, and no shade on the Mojaxx, I would choose the Orbit. Absolutely, I would choose the Orbit. For me, that sounded incredible. Stephen, though, he's used to that Mojaxx sound. He's very happy with that Mojaxx sound. He doesn't think he'd want to swap because he loves the sound of that Mojaxx as it stands. And again, it's all just completely subjective, and it's going to depend on the music you play and the rooms you play in, the speakers you play on, etc. All of this will have an impact. And I can't say to you categorically, yet the Orbit is the best sounding mixer. I can tell you it sounds awesome. Like, that's all I have to leave it there. Like, it sounds awesome. I will say, and this is not going to be a complete love fest, right? Think very carefully. If you're going to buy a high-end Rotary, think about the rack mount thing. I'm just not a massive fan of rack mixers. You know, I've had a nightmare trying to use that mixer here in the lab and at home and everything else. I'm having to like prop it up on boxes and all kinds of things, because obviously I didn't want to rack it, and their first demo unit, I didn't want to ruin the, you know, the faceplate or anything by racking it. So I've been all kinds of things with it. I don't have that rack kind of set up in my life, and I don't want to. You know, I don't like those old school booths where you have to like reach over the mixer to reach your turntables or the media players. That doesn't work for me. I don't like that. Rack mount for me, it's just it's a thing that's not part of my life, and I'm not looking for it to be part of my life, really. But you might be all about that. You might have a vintage style console and that's how you work and you love it. And if you do, fair play. But just worth bearing that in mind. If you're getting into the rack thing for the first time, it's not just a case of you buy the mixer and then you use it. You have to think about how you're going to situate that in your life. And of course, that probably won't be a factor for a lot of clubs. And I do see a lot of clubs buying this. I suspect that a large proportion of the customers for the Orbit.6 are going to be clubs who care about sound and have really good sound systems, because this thing will sound like nothing else on a really high quality big rig, like nothing else. Like, you run it in a big room. Going to bring an energy, it's going to bring something to that room which many mixers just can't offer. So it is wonderful. Yes, it's a lot of money, but I think they've justified the price. And that's not to say that you can necessarily justify the price to yourself as a customer, but I do think in terms of the quality of the materials, the design, the work that's been put into it to handcraft this thing, I can see where the money is coming from. I can see where the cost is coming from to them, and I can see where the cost is justified. It just may be that to you it's not justified, or it is. I don't know. I hate to be so woolly with this, but I hope you see where I'm coming from, right? This is a unique product. It will probably appeal to quite a small niche of DJs in the world, and you know, they're not going to be able to manufacture these by the absolute truckload. They're going to do plenty, but it's not a mass market, you know, that kind of product. It isn't that. It's not a Zone 96. It isn't that. It's not a DJ MV10. This is a very, very unique and very different prospect. And on that level, I think it's incredibly successful. In the comments this week, let us know what you think about the Orbit.6. Let us know what you think about the whole idea of rotaries in general. You know, I'm pushing for them all the time because I love them. I do love a good rotary. It's a unique experience, completely different from anything else. And also, let us know what's your favourite mixer you've ever played on. Don't have to have owned it. Like, what's the best mixer you've ever played on? What's given you the most joy to spin on? Because for me, I think if I had an Orbit.6 around for a while, it would be pretty high up that list. Thank you for watching this episode of Beatsource Tech. I do hope you've enjoyed it or found it useful. If you have, please give the video a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I'll see you next time.